Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Lost inside my own skin, now I've been tripping round, finally falling to the ground. This frozen heart is melting, I'm coming back to life. Her voice is resonating, I know one day she will be my wife. Why? Her face is beautiful, and she's so lovable. She is incredible, she is the one I need. She's a little of everything, in a beautiful way. By her side is where I belong, that is where I will stay. And this frozen heart is melted, and I'm finally alive. And her voice is resonating, I know one day she'll be in my life. Permanently.
Richard Mabala is an author. He's an activist. He's very generous with his time, generous to the youth. So in a way, he's a philanthropist. He's a poet, and he's a family man. He loves it. He's always talking about his family. So we are really honored to have you here, Richard. Please come to the front so we can start. So first, I'd like to start by asking you in your own words, like, how do you describe yourself? Because a lot of people have described you in newspaper articles, blogs. So who's Richard Mabala?
Okay, at that I think I will have to start in Swahili.
Yes.
Mwingereza wa kuzaliwa, Tanzania wa kujiandikisha, na Mnyamwezi kwa ubatizo. An activist, as you say, someone, an aerialist. Someone once said, because some people questioned whether I actually wrote Makengeza myself. They said, how could Mzungu write Makengeza? So I was talking about this to a writer, and he said, it's obvious you wrote it, because the person who writes Makengeza is clear he's a frustrated Nyereriist. And it's true. But I think the difference between an activist and a cynic, an activist can be quite disillusioned sometimes. Things are not going the way he wants them to go. But he doesn't give up. He finds another way of trying to do it. So through writing, through training, through meeting with young people, through taking part in different activities around things I feel very strongly about, like gender, like young people, like participation, like giving a voice to people in the community. Even if it doesn't work as the way you want it to work, there is always something that gives you the pleasure and the desire to carry on doing it, and you keep on meeting people who are such incredible people that it makes you want to continue. So everything I do, from my writing to my work with Churchill and others in Tamasha, to the work I've done around gender, to the teaching I did, it's all around the same thing. How do we get a better society? That's what I'm looking for.
And please tell us about your childhood. Before you came to Tanzania, were there things that happened that showed you or prepared you for your path as an activist?
Definitely my parents. My father wanted to be a pastor, and then the Second World War happened, so he thought that he would be a coward if he didn't actually participate in fighting against Hitler. So he went into the army, and then after the war, he wanted to leave the army, and there were no jobs, and he was getting married to my mother, so he went back into the army. But when I was about 11, he left, and he worked for about 20 years for an NGO in England fighting for the right to play for children, and particularly working in the poorer areas of cities like in London and elsewhere. So I think that obviously it had a big effect on me. He once complained that my last brother, he's very committed, but he's a very good businessman as well, so he's quite rich. So he said, well, at least I have one son who is making money. So I said, well, it's your fault, Dad. You showed us a bad example. Because he could have got a better job, but he was very passionate about the work he did with children. And then my mother, my mother thinks a very good example of women of her generation. She studied to be a journalist, but she got married very young, and she never really had the chance to do a permanent job, because she had children very fast. My sister had epilepsy, so she spent a lot of time looking after her. And every time she wanted to start doing a job, she never had the chance. So she threw herself into a lot of philanthropic activities, particularly church activities, always working in the community in one way or another. So, yeah, I think they gave me a bad example. Definitely.
Good example.
Oh, sorry, good example. Yeah.
And what about your education, formal education?
Yeah, because we were always traveling around, I was sent to a boarding school at the age of 7, which was a disaster. I hated it. And I cannot understand why anyone sends their children to boarding school at the age of 7. Or 3, as they do here, or 2. The whole point about parenthood is to be with your children and to bring them up yourself. In the case of my parents, they wanted me to have a settled education because we were moving all the time. If you're in the army, you're moving the whole time. But it was good academically, and I went to a private school for secondary school, which was also very good academically. It was a very Catholic school. It was run by monks. So I nearly became a monk. I just escaped. But I think it gave me a very good academic background, and also, I mean, they were quite committed people, so it continued to build in me a determination to do something. And even in school, when I was in the last year, because when I came to Tanzania, I was quite shocked. I was teaching in a secondary school, Milambo Secondary School in Tabora. I found the same system here that I was fighting against when I was at school in England, of the mistreatment of the first-year kids when they come to school for the first time, the bullying and so on. So I started the first-year society, which was meant to bring the people in the first year together and to protect them so that they wouldn't be bullied and so on. Then I come here and I find the same thing happening. Colonial hangover. And then I went to Oxford University. Yeah. That's enough.
You did language, right?
Yeah, I was going to do French and Spanish. But then I discovered if I did 2 languages, I'd have to do linguistics, and I really didn't like linguistics, and I loved literature. So I changed to French and history to avoid doing linguistics. And then when I come here, having taught literature for about 10 years, they changed the syllabus. And so linguistics was half the A-level syllabus in English, so I had to learn linguistics myself instead.
So how did you come? What happened? What drove you to come to Tanzania? You told me about applying to go somewhere else.
Yeah. I had decided well before I finished university that I'd like to be a volunteer. And so I applied to an organization called Voluntary Service Overseas, which sends people all over the world. And because I spoke Spanish, and because At that time in Latin America, there was a lot of struggles against the army dictatorships and oppression of various kinds. I really wanted to go and be a part of that. So I said I'd like to go to Latin America. And they said, well, we don't think your Spanish is good enough. And secondly, we don't think we have the kind of job you really want to do, because we only have jobs teaching in private universities, and that doesn't sound like what you want to do. And I said, absolutely right. So they were going to send me to Rwanda to be an English teacher. So I said, yeah. I didn't have any particular feelings about Rwanda, to be honest, either for or against, but it's fine. Then my sister died suddenly, so I stayed at home with my mother for 6 months to support her, and taught at the local school. When I was ready to come, they said, oh no, there's no place in Rwanda, but Tanzania wants a French teacher. I'm a French teacher, guys, eh? Yeah. That's why I came to Tanzania. And I said, yes! Why didn't I say Tanzania in the first place? Because I'd read Nyerere when I was in university out of interest. Only to find out that if I had said I wanted to go to Tanzania, they would have sent me somewhere else. Because, you know, Tanzania was in the 70s and 60s was very tough politically, and very awake, and very strong. And actually Nyerere broke off diplomatic relationship with England over the question of Zimbabwe. And I was one of the first 5 volunteers to be allowed back into Tanzania. So they're frightened stiff of these young English idiots coming and blasting their mouth off about politics without understanding what they were talking about. But then when I got here, I wrote to them and said, you must be crazy. If you don't know something about politics in Tanzania, you're finished. They're going to ask you what you think about South Africa, what you think about apartheid, what you think about the liberation struggle, what's happening in the United States, and so on. You have to know politics. You don't have to be a politician, but you have to know what's going on in the world. And actually, I think you have to be committed as well. So I think they changed their policy after that. But that's why I came to Tanzania. So the best way of getting to Tanzania then was to ask not to go to Tanzania. And it worked very well for me, yeah.
So after staying, you came in 1973?
Yeah.
Wow. Then stayed till 1979. Then applied for Tanzanian citizenship.
Yeah.
And got it 2 years later, in 1981.
1982, February 1982.
1982. My stalking. I've been stalking you on the internet, finding out everything you've been doing.
God, these guys stalking me on the internet. Is this fair? I don't know.
So, what changed from a volunteer in Tanzania and then a citizen of Tanzania?
Well, maybe let me say, why I applied for citizenship. That normally if you come as a volunteer, you come for 2 years, and then you can extend for 1 year. So after 2 years, I said, well, I think I'm beginning to understand Tanzania a little bit now, so maybe I'm more useful to my students. So I extended for another year, and then I asked for another year, and another year, and another year. And I decided at some stage, either you commit yourself fully, or you leave. But you don't sit on the fence for the rest of your life. Oh no, I can't talk about that, I'm an expatriate. You get involved or you go. And I was much happier staying. So to me, becoming a citizen, first of all, I was very proud of becoming a Tanzanian citizen and to identify totally with what Tanzania was trying to do. But secondly, yeah, I had the right to speak much more. If I'm an outsider, I don't have so much right to speak, but if I'm a citizen and I pay my taxes and I vote and everything else, I have the right to speak. So, all these years, and at that time I wasn't thinking I would write columns in the newspaper, but I've been writing columns in the newspaper now for 20 years. No one has ever said, how dare you write those things, who are you? Because I am a Tanzanian, I have the right to speak just like anyone else. Yeah.
So that's what changed. You got a voice.
I got a more authentic voice, because obviously when you're teaching, you have a voice. Probably too much of a voice, but and literature in Tanzania was very political. So my students, we used to have fantastic debates in class. So yeah, but as I say, I mean, it's more grounded if you're a citizen. But I didn't apply to be a citizen because I wanted a voice. Yeah? I applied to be a citizen because I wanted to be committed entirely to working with other Tanzanians to build Tanzania. Yeah.
And why gender activism, gender and youth activism? There's so many issues. Why do you feel strongly about this?
Yeah, there are so many issues, but 50% of the population is quite a big issue, which are the women. Yeah? And yeah, I mean, around 1975 was when gender began to be talked about. It was quite a strong theme in the literature syllabus we were teaching. And I used to have incredible arguments with my students. And one of them said to me once, "Mwalimu, we know you're right, but don't expect us to agree with you." Because there was this residual patriarchal attitude which they weren't prepared to admit was wrong. So I think I've always been committed in one way or another to those who are not being given the space they should be being given. And so the question of women was very clear. And I mean, it's difficult for people who weren't around at that time to know it. I mean, in 1975, you'd have a meeting and to discuss a plan, and then everyone would discuss it. At the end, someone said, and probably there wouldn't be any woman there at all. And then someone would say, "Oh, and what about the women? Oh, shit, we forgot the women." And then you'd have to start all over again. Yeah? And then, because I was involved very much in participatory development at community level, it was very clear from the 1970s onward that unless you listened to the women, you weren't going to get the priorities of the community correct. So, and there were so many things around which to discuss this. So when we were preparing for Beijing in 1995, I belonged to a group of facilitators who facilitated the NGO preparation for Beijing, and then we came together to form Tanzania Gender Networking Program. So that was how I became a sort of an official thing, but it was always part of myself. And then with regard to young people, I think that's always been there. Even when I was at university, I ran a youth center, part-time, in my free time. Yeah? But for the same reason, and I think that youth is now the new gender. That people, I'm not saying that people have got rid of their patriarchal attitudes, but they know better how to hide them. So people can talk very progressively about women and the importance of women, and however much you prod them, they will carry on saying the right words. But youth, people can't hide their emotions. They get angry very easily. Problem with young people, blah, 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 automatically. And if you take young women, then they have a double problem, both as young and as women. So Tamasha, we've invented the word genderation, which is the mixture of gender and generation. And the two go together very strongly.
How did your family react to your activism there and here, and you deciding to become a Tanzanian?
Yeah, with regard to my activism there, I think they were tolerant. Yeah? And my first younger brother at that time was very hippie. And then I was Marxist. And so my mother spent most of her time trying to read all the books to understand us. Now, this thing in Marx that you're talking about, I was reading a book yesterday. She really tried very hard. I mean, I was very impressed. And, yeah, because my father was passionate about deprived children, then I think they understood it. When I came to Tanzania, and I decided I wanted to become a citizen, I invited them to Tanzania. By that time, I just left Tabora. I'd moved to Morogoro. But we met in Moshi, and I took them to the game parks first. But the first day they arrived, they said, so what's your plans? I said, well, Mum, Dad, come on. I mean, this is the first night. You're tired. Yeah, have a rest. Yeah? And then the next day, now arrested, so what are your plans? So I told them, and they accepted it, but they weren't entirely happy. But when we went to Tabora, where I'd been teaching for 4 years, and I belonged to a church choir, and the choir had a big celebration for them. We slaughtered 2 goats, and we sang all day. When we came out of there, both of them had tears in their eyes, and they said, go ahead. We never knew you could be so happy in life. And they meant it, because when they went back home, my brother wrote to me and said, what witchcraft did you give the parents there? You know, they've come back, they're buzzing, they're happy, they're excited about your life, you know, even though you say you want to stay in Tanzania. So, yeah, they accepted it, absolutely. Yeah. And they said, actually, we always guessed you'd do something like this. Because actually, when I was 12, I think I wanted to leave school and become a missionary. That was a bit crazy. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So you were a teacher, a lecturer, a senior advisor to the UN. You actually headed up a country on Ethiopia.
I was head of a section inside UNICEF on adolescent development. Yeah.
Yes. Mm. So how did all that prepare you for Tamasha and your role as an activist?
What prepared me more than anything else was when I joined UNICEF in Tanzania, because Tanzania, they'd been given money to set up an out-of-school program, which at that time was called the Behavior Change Against HIV/AIDS, the Out-of-School Behavior Change Against HIV/AIDS Program. So normally if you didn't drink half a bottle of water before you pronounced it, you get stuck somewhere in the middle. And we started in Kisarawe and Musoma Vijijini. And then it expanded and it became the model for the Ministry of Youth. And that's when I met Churchill. Churchill, please stand up. Who was volunteer #1 in the whole of Dar es Salaam. He knew every single youth group in Dar es Salaam. Wow. So I was really impressed and got him involved in the program until he became a better facilitator than me, which I've never forgiven him for. But together we worked on this out-of-school program, and it was community theatre, training of peer educators, convincing the community to build youth centres, and then continuing to train more people within the youth centre so the young people became community resource people, which then also changed their relationship with their community. Because although elders in general are quite negative about young people, they're also concerned about their children. So when they saw their children becoming active and activist and positive and so on, they accepted the program and I think contributed to a change. So even the basic program of Tamasha started with the same kind of model. But the thing is, if you're UNICEF, it's an international organization. You can't work on the ground. You're supposed to support other people to do the work. And I preferred doing the work myself. Like TGNP and TAMWA and Taula are voices at national level for women, and who can also bring out issues which have happened in the villages which no one would hear about, that young people needed the same kind of organization which would both work with young people but also provide a voice for them to speak out about what they felt, or if they were being mistreated, to raise the issue.
So before I go on to Tamasha, why do you think the older generation is so negative about young people?
Off the record or on the record? They're jealous. They're jealous and they're afraid. They know that young people have received an education that they didn't receive. They can access opportunities that they never accessed. They know things which they don't know. Even educated older people like myself. I wouldn't even dream of trying to fiddle with my mobile phone. I will always give it to my son to do. He knows it much better than I do, right from about this age. He was mending the DVD, not the recorder, not me. And so, what is it that older people have? Of course, there are a lot of wise older people who have no problem with young people. But those who are not so wise, and who maybe are not so well behaved as well, because we're always saying, vijana wa siku hizi. Why don't we say wazee wa siku hizi? Walevi, wakatili, nini? There are far too many of them like that, who are mistreating children and young people all the time, and giving an extremely bad example, and then blaming young people for misbehaving. So for them, the only thing they have to maintain their authority, because they don't have the character to maintain their authority, is age. So age has now been sort of set as the standard by which you should judge someone. And I don't think this was true traditionally. I think young people and women had a bigger space traditionally. If you look at some of the traditions before the colonialists came, it wasn't perfect, but communities knew that they had to accommodate these two women and young people, and they had ways of doing it. Now, age has been sort of set as the only arbiter. Of course, the second thing is, yes, young people are frustrated. They don't get the opportunities they want. Young people are at an age where they take more risks than maybe I will. And so they do things which the elders don't like. But I mean, the elders did the same thing when they were young as well. I don't know why they can't remember that. I went to one community when we were doing research into the girl child. And I was talking to one elder who was really blaming the young people. They're promiscuous, sex in all directions. But then I was asking about when he was young. He said, oh yeah, there was this disease called guruneti. Guruneti is a sexually transmitted infection. I think it's buboes. So you get a big sore and then it bursts open. So it's like a hand grenade, a guruneti. And he said, yeah, it was really prevalent when I was young. I said, so if you were so well behaved when you were young, how come that guruneti went on around there? And he laughed, and we didn't carry on talking about how bad the young people were after that. So, yeah, I think sometimes old people have short memories. Of course, some young people misbehave, but I think the problem is that older men are protecting their positions. That's really the issue. And because they do, then young people become confrontational against them. I think one of the successes of Tamasha's programs and the out-of-school program is that because we train them in life skills, their negotiating skills are very good. So they don't just confront the elders, they find ways of taking them with them, so that you break down some of their resistance. That's my personal feeling. It's just a gut reaction that these guys are threatening us. So there's one book I was reading which was arguing about violence in the Great Lakes, and it was arguing that actually one of the gender issues now is between old men and young men, because the old men are blocking all the opportunities for the young people, for the young men. They're even taking their wives or their girlfriends, sugar daddies. So the only way young people can access opportunities is through violence. So the violence comes out of the old men blocking all their opportunities.
How did you name Tamasha? What were you thinking?
Well, fortunately, I was going to a lot of very boring meetings in the UN, so I had time to think about it. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I left the UN was there's so many meetings, and the UN was at a time when they were trying to have what they call one UN, which is totally impossible. So in Ethiopia, there were 21 different UN agencies. So we used to sit every week or every month and discuss how we could act as one UN. And I spent my time trying to add up how much money was being wasted in these meetings, trying to imagine what each person's salary was. So how much was their salary for 3 hours when we sat there? I knew it was a huge waste of money. But then I began to think, I don't think I want to stay in the UN any longer, so I'd like to have a youth organization. The first idea was 2D, second decade. Because in UNICEF, even in UNICEF is supposed to be the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is up to the age of 18. But UNICEF is mainly concerned with children of this age, up to about here, but definitely not up to here. So we should have we should look at second decade, and then went on playing around with it, and then Tamasha is celebration, we celebrate young people. But it's an acronym for Taasisi, Maendeleo, Shirikishi, Arusha. It was supposed to be called Tamasha Vijana, but Brela said, no, you can't put Vijana in the title. How can you put Vijana in the title? But I guess that's because Vijana is supposed to belong to a certain political party, at least at that time when we started. Because I still don't understand why we weren't allowed to have Vijana in the title. So it's Taasisi, Amendeo, Shirikishi, Vijana, Arusha, Tamasha, Vijana.
Yes. Interesting. You know, a lot of entrepreneurs start businesses because they're trying to solve personal problems. So is there anything that was personal to you or your co-founders, except your activism for the youth? Was there anything?
What, in terms of making money? Or?
No. Just your own things.
No, it was,
were you thinking of your son? Were you thinking of the world you're creating for people who are personal to you?
No, not particularly. I don't think so. I think that I really enjoy listening to young people, working with young people, gaining from their ideas, their vision, and so on, and getting very frustrated that they don't have the space to do it. And so, no, it was just a feeling that, and they are also 50% of the population. So it's another different 50%, but they're 50% of the population. So, and there are very few organizations that are doing this. But we did want to do it in an entrepreneurial way as possible, because I think the classic NGO model, as is being shown now, doesn't work. And a lot of NGOs are collapsing because you depend on donor funding. You get donor funding, you employ people, and then the donor funding dries up and you've got people you're supposed to pay salaries to, and you're really stuck. We were sort of more of a guerrilla organization. We work in the forest rather than a traditional army, so none of us are employed except the accountant. Accountant, yes, because we need a good accountant who makes sure that we use the money properly. But otherwise, we're all part-time. If we get contracts to do the work, we do it. We're paid fees for the work we do, but then there is space for people to find other things to do when the money dries up. And that's also why we registered as a not-for-profit company rather than an NGO. Yeah, and then the dream is to have an institute for participatory training which will actually pay for itself and pay for so we will be less dependent on donor funding. But it's taken us 7 years to get the title deed for our land.
Why?
Because without realizing it, I bought 10 acres in the expansion area for Arusha. So it's prime land and everyone wants it. So every time we tried to go through the channels to get it done, it's, oh yeah, no problem, but actually they were sort of doing things behind our back.
Guys were trying to take it from you.
Yeah, and people warned me, said, you better get this registered as quickly as possible. Now the land is on the Arusha map, so we're officially there. And we just have to sign off with our neighbors, and then we can get the title deed. Yeah. But it's taken 7 years, and we expected by now we would have built the institute. And that, for us, that is the basis of our self-reliance. So once that's built, because I believe we have extremely good facilitators, we have very innovative programs, and the institute will be built specifically for participation, that other people want to use it as well. And in that way we can pay for ourselves even if the donors are not interested.
I read on your website that you have co-founders. Like, you're not the only founder.
Absolutely, yeah.
How did you guys meet? And
Well, I've already introduced one of them.
oh, okay.
Churchill, we met, was it 2000? 1999? End of 1999. So we met back in the last century. Yeah. And then when I was part of a program called the Sarah Communication Initiative. Now, some of you may have seen the videos of Toto Sara in the past. And there was a, a highly intelligent and very disruptive young woman called Edwina, who came to the first meeting of Sarah in Tanzania, and then when I went to work in Kenya, we needed to send someone to a youth meeting in Mauritius. So I suggested Edwina, and she went, and she's activist down to her fingertips, has always been, and is very committed down in the community. And so she became my youth intern when I was in Nairobi, and she and Churchill have facilitated together many times, and with me. So we thought we would start it together. So that's how we started. Yeah.
Apart from the land issue, were there any other challenges you went through trying to get Tamasha on its feet?
Yeah, it's quite difficult to get recognized. You know what you want to do. You have to sell yourself, and it takes time to be able to sell yourself.
About how long did it take?
Well, we were registered in 2007, and I still think we're not as well known as we should do. I think those we work with like the work we do, but we haven't been able to really... I don't think we're very good at selling ourselves yet, and this is where I'm really grateful to Neman. Where are you, Neman? And Hassan, who are two of our young facilitators, and they've done huge efforts on the website and on a blog, so people are beginning to know a bit more about us. And then we have finally become quite official, and we've developed a 3-year plan which we're now trying to sell. And someone has given us money to actually concentrate on selling ourselves, because he really likes the work we're doing, but he thinks that we're not very good at telling other people about it. And it's true, I think we're so involved in actually doing the work, and I think this is the problem with many activist NGOs. They're so involved in doing the work, they don't have time to think about how to tell other people how they're doing the work. Yeah. But that's very necessary, and I think from an entrepreneurial point of view, it's absolutely essential.
And it's actually quite challenging, especially when you're starting out. You don't really have the funding to do it. You
Exactly,
have to hire advertising companies. Before you got this guy to give you the money to sell yourself, what were you doing?
Well, we've done a lot of different. I mean, the way we do it is that you get a contract. So, for example, UNICEF have given us contracts in Somalia, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, in Kenya, Burundi, Lesotho, Mozambique.
Wow.
So you do it, and then the facilitators who are doing it, out of the fee they are paid, they pay 10% into the organization. So that 10% is our running costs. Because the other problem, I think, the other problem is how do you institutionalize yourself? Because in general, donors want you to do the work they want to be done. They're not prepared to pay you to institutionalize yourself so that you can do the work better. They just want you out there in the villages doing whatever work they want. So we've used that 10%, I think, quite effectively. And that's what's kept us going. And then, but as we become better known, then we get some money for rent of office and all this kind of stuff. So gradually We're expanding, but it's difficult, and especially at the minute where money is very tough. And another one, I hope you're listening out here, donors, is donors have great difficulty in holding the government accountable for corruption because many of them are corrupt as well. I don't know how many times Churchill and I are being asked for a kickback in one way or another, even before we get the contract. I remember Churchill telling me a story. The guy rings up, "Hey Churchill, can you come to town? I really want to discuss. There's a really good chance for you, for Tamasha. We really want Tamasha to do the work, so can you come and discuss it in town?" So Churchill says, "Why don't you send me an email with the concept?" No, I think we really need to discuss it together." "Yeah, but why don't you send me the concept note and then we'll write a proposal?" And then gradually you realize that the discussion is, how does he get his 10% if he gives us the contract? And so we've lost 2 or 3 contracts because we won't do that.
From NGOs?
From international organizations. And even when we hired our accountant, we gave them a trick question that, the short list. So we said, these days donors, they very often want a kickback. So if you were the accountant, how would you do this? So 2 of the short list told us very clearly how you could do it. And the third one said, "That is absolutely disgusting, it's immoral, it's completely..." And he blasted us, and we were sort of going lower and lower in our chair. And we said, "Well, actually, that was a trick question, thank you, you passed that one very well." And he's our accountant until today. But it shows, there is this collusion between NGOs and donors. It can be about kickbacks, it can be about ideologies. For example, the PEPFAR ideology, the President's Emergency something. The George Bush Fund, where you weren't allowed to talk about condoms. And you weren't allowed to talk about working with sex workers either. And so do you compromise your principles because you need the money and you want to work with young people? Or do you say, no, if that's the case, I'm sorry, we don't take your money. We are going to talk about condoms. Or do you take the money saying you're not going to talk about condoms and then you talk about them? Which I think is actually what most people did. But so you're put in, until you are strong enough financially on your own, you're put in difficult positions where you're in a dilemma. How do you deal with this kind of thing? But at least on taking kickbacks, I don't believe Tamasha will ever do that, because even the money you're given, you've written your plan, you've written your action plan. I'm going to use this money for this, and this money for this, and this money for this, and then you give them 10%. So what are you going to? But you still have to fulfill your action plan.
When you started out, you had particular aims and objectives for Tamasha, gender, youth, and you knew how you were going to carry on doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Has it ever changed? Has the job description broadened the more you?
No, I think the vision remains the same, and even the mission. I think what has changed is that we had more of a vision of peer education at the beginning, which is still, although we did it in a participatory way and we trained them in life skills rather than in HIV messages, but still the peer educators regard themselves as educators, as a sort of top-down element to it. So you have this elite group of people who've been given training who then go out and blast everyone else about what they should be doing. So we moved from there to Uragbishi, to animation, to a broader developmental training, and the role of facilitators in that development, particularly with young people, particularly with young women, but not so much educating, but in terms of kuibua, of provoking them into thinking about their own situation and how they want to deal with it, and then taking action themselves. so they become less directive and more provocative in the way they work in the community. So I think that's been a big change. So our foundation course is not Elimurika now, it's Uragbish. That's the basis. Although we still teach life skills and so on, because that's very participatory, but in a broader development context. And then secondly, I think that the model we have of youth centers, which I still think are really important. Young people need their own space in community. The only thing that belongs to young people in the community, nikijiwe. It's not even a jiwe, it's a kijiwe. And that's why they're very alienated. They need a space where they can organize. It doesn't have to be a big youth center. It can be a room or 2 rooms where they meet, organize, choose their leaders, do their entrepreneurship, invite people, training, and it's their hub, which belongs to them. But it's proved quite difficult to get this to happen. So, yeah, we're still working on it, but I think we still need to think about how to do it better. Yeah.
Do you remember the first community you worked with after you founded Tamasha?
I worked with so many communities. Churchill, you remember the first community we worked with? The first community we worked with in Tamasha.
It's been that long.
Well, it's not just been that long, but I mean, as I said, we've worked in many different places, even in Tanzania, and we've worked with some of the youth networks that were set up when I was in UNICEF, which are still going in Temeke and Magu, particularly in Kisarawe. But Newala must have been one of the first communities we worked with, where we trained girls to be researchers. We did the same in Temeke, actually, and Magomeni. That must have been one of the first, actually. We did research into vulnerabilities of adolescent girls. So we trained young women to be the researchers.
And then they go out and get the information.
Yeah, they did, yeah, very, very much so. And then we wrote a report which for the Joint Learning Initiative on Children and Age, which actually forced them to accept that adolescents should be a part of their program, because before that they weren't.
And how do you go about selecting these girls that you train, and do you announce it? Where do you announce it?
To begin with, we announced it, and we asked young people. Usually, we ask young people to choose their own representatives. So we announce it, and then in the communities where we need people, then they select the people who will do the job. And in general, that works quite well, but we've had to change that a bit in Newala, because the Mtendaji Kata, the ward executive, puts his cousin in there, and then the village chair puts his cousin in there, and so on. And so, at least for artistic purposes, we weren't getting the right people. So last year we actually did auditions. We announced it, and we asked in each ward, any young person who wanted to be a part of it, they came and they had to do something, a piece, whatever, a small piece about young people in their community, whether it's a drama or a song or whatever. And then based on that, then we chose the ones that we would work with.
What channels exactly? Like the ward executives? Do you go to them, or do you go to a community center, put a poster?
There are no community centers, my friend. There are very few community centers. If you want to work in communities in Tanzania, you have to start at the district level. So you go to the district executive director, and you explain your program to him, and he gives his blessing. Not like a Catholic bishop, but he gives his blessing. And then he allows you to go and talk at the ward level. So you go to the ward executive officer and the village chair and whatever, and you explain it to them, and then you start identifying the young people who will call the other young people, and as you have a meeting of young people, decide on what should be done. And this is one place where also I think we've learned as well, because we're doing work for Oxfam in a program called Chukua Tour, Take Action. And we had evaluated their program, and we said, well, it's a great program, but there are no young people. We've forgotten about young people, as always. And so they gave us a chance to do it with young people. And because we had experience of training Tanzania Gender Networking Program in animation as well, in Uragbishi bit, and Tanzania Gender Networking Program does it through existing women's groups, and it works very well. But there are no existing youth groups. So actually you have to start 3 steps back. So you have to start by going to the Vijiwe, or the Boda Boda riders, or the girls at the well, or whatever, and maybe with a picture, and say, what do you think of this picture? You know, some kind of provocative picture. Or you make a statement like, Shuri zakata ni za ukata. And get people discussing. Then you begin to identify who is concerned about their position in the community, their community, and then you can build a group from there. But you can't go and expect to find an already existing group. So it's a longer process, yeah.
Being an NGO, a non-profit company, Tamasha, how do the people who work for Tamasha earn a living?
Well, as I say, I mean, we have 3 main programs. We have a program in Newala, which is to reach young people in the whole district, which is going to every ward, all 30 wards. We have a program in Shinyanga and Ngorongoro, which is the Take Action program. And we have a program with adolescent mothers, with the Population Council. Those are the 3 main programs. So each of the programs has a coordinator who gets a half salary or a quarter salary, and is expected to spend at least half his time or her time on that program. And then our facilitators, who are independent, but they're very well trained. So, for example, we're working in 8 districts in Shinyanga. So each of the districts will have 1 Tamasha facilitator who will be paid a fee for the number of days that they work there.
Where do you get money to pay the fee?
It depends. In these 3 cases, for the adolescent mothers, we've been working with Population Council for several years. The one in Newala is funded by Positive Action. We did a pilot with International Center for Research on Women, and they liked it, so they gave us money to expand the program to the whole district. And then the Chukua tour work is funded by Oxfam. And then, you know, for example, Twaweza funded us to produce 11 cartoon booklets about civic engagement with young people taking the lead. Well, actually, they just wanted it on civic engagement. We said, no, we'd like to have young people taking the lead in civic engagement. And then their main character was only a boy. We said, no, we want a boy and a girl, and they do it together. And they accepted that. So
these guys approach you and give you jobs, and then
yeah. Or alternatively, apply. We see something, there's a space to do something or other, and we write a proposal.
And do you have a company culture, like a sort of a workplace atmosphere that you've tried to consciously build in Tamasha?
Not yet. I think the company culture is, I think the strong point of our company culture is that we're very innovative. We're always trying new things. We're never satisfied with whatever we're doing. So we're very good facilitators. And we're very good when we're working in the community. I think we're good in producing materials like the booklets we produced. But the weakness of our model is that donors want more than just being very good in community and being very good facilitators. They want very good reports. and very on time. And it's very difficult to hold people accountable for that when they are part-time. And so I think that's our big weakness, is we do good work and then we mess it up because we don't report on it at the right time. And that's what we're working on now. And that's why I think now, because we've done enough work, we're well enough known, we should move to actually employing people, even employing me, so that we can develop an office culture. But otherwise people come into the office when there is work to do. You can't force them to come in. We've tried often to have weekly meetings, but it doesn't really work unless there is actually something going on. And working with funders is extraordinarily frustrating. And as I say, I think our guerrilla method has helped us to survive. I mean, for example, we were asked by USAID to apply for a big program for adolescent girls. And we went through all the hoops. We wrote the first concept note, and then the proposal, and we revised the proposal, and we revised the revised proposal, and we revised the revised proposal, and the budget, and they came to do an institutional assessment of us. And they said, yeah, you have some weaknesses, but I think we can deal with this. And we were told, you will sign the contract next week. And so we hadn't taken any other work, because we knew we were getting this work, and so we wanted to really concentrate on it. It was a good chance to do what we really wanted to do with adolescent girls. And then they just went silent. They didn't even say, no, we've changed our mind. So, we sat there for 2 months saying, well, when we're writing emails, say, okay, well, what's happening? We're ready to sign the proposal. And now working for Oxfam, they say, well, we're going to start in January. And you start in June. And so it's very difficult. Even if you had full-time staff, I think it's more difficult, because where are you going to find the salaries for 6 months? But at the minute, well, now actually we've got it, so we're going to start doing it. Otherwise, bangaiza, wakati unangoja, while you're waiting for it to happen. So you have to allow people that freedom. But I think the culture is that when something happens, and everyone's ready to come together and get it going, and we really enjoy working together. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask the last 2 questions, then open it up to the audience. So start writing down your questions. There's lots of questions that I haven't asked, but we are running out of time, so
I'm probably talking too much.
Is there anything that you got wrong about the work that Tamasha should be doing? And how did you remedy it?
Well, I think I've talked about some of them. I think I read something, these personality test things. Well, there's one of them which talks about beginners and finishers. And beginners are really creative, they're very good at starting things up, and there are lots of ideas about new things they're doing, but they're hopeless at bringing it to a conclusion. And I think all the main Tamasha facilitators are beginners. We don't have a single finisher among us, including myself. So actually, we're really looking for a good finisher. If anyone's a good finisher here, come and talk to us. Because they gave examples of other organizations, and they bring in someone who's a good finisher. And he cleared up all the leftover work in 3 months. And we do it, we try and do it, and we struggle, but we're not good at that. So I think that's one thing we're changing. I think that, as I say now, I think that we got it right in terms of surviving as an organization, but we got it wrong in terms of developing an organizational culture by allowing this space for everyone to do whatever they want to do in the meantime. It has cost us in terms of, as I say, not reporting on time. And people need the reports, or they're not finishing the research report on time, excellent research results, but writing it up. I think that sometimes we have worked with dodgy partners, and we put too much faith in them, and we didn't follow them up at the community level. And so we assumed that they were as committed as we were, and were doing the work that we thought that they were doing, and then to find not so. I think that we were too directive at the beginning in what we were training young people in. I think now we allow them more space. Yeah, I think those are the things, yeah.
And Startup Grind is about entrepreneurship. Buni is about entrepreneurship. So what are the opportunities in social entrepreneurship for the young founders of companies today? And what can we do as communities to help in Tamasha's work?
Well, I think there are several levels in this. I think Buni and Startup Grind, it's very difficult for them to start working in a village in Newala. That's our job. And the first thing that we're really stressing is that not all young people in those levels, and I'm not talking of the ones who have access to technology and so on, they don't all want to be selling chapatis or farming mchicha. Or, there are some who would like to make a living out of serving their communities. But the way most funding works is that the funder is given a good salary, a very good salary. Maybe even the director of Tamasha is given a very good salary. And then when it comes to young peer educators or animators or community justice facilitators or community media people or whatever, they say, oh, no, they're supposed to volunteer. And so we're saying that's unfair to young people, and young people join organizations for entrepreneurial reasons. It gives them exposure, it gives them training, it gives them opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have had. And then they discover that they're being cheated. Okay, they're given the exposure, whatever, but they're only supposed to do whatever the organization wants them to do. There's no space for them to grow and develop or to be able to access other opportunities. So one of the things we believe in very strongly is training them enough to enable them to work with other people as well. So our researchers are being taken by other organizations as well because they do good work. The peer educators are recognized as being very good peer educators. So if another organization wants to work with them, then it does well. And then the youth center and the youth network, which is the network of the youth centers, which is recognized at district level, is independent, can access opportunities and resources either from the council or from outsiders on their own. They don't need us, they don't have to go through Tamasha. So we're training them to be independent and have enough training to be able to do other things. That's the idea. So social entrepreneurship at that level is that we should recognize that young people are doing very good work, and why shouldn't they be paid for doing it? Maybe they're not being paid a full salary, but they should be paid enough to be able to do the work. Other organizations say, oh, no, we can't give them an allowance, but we'll give them an income-generating activity. Now that is a conflict of interest. If I'm a peer educator, I want to do something for my community, but I need to make some money for myself with my income-generating activity. So where do I go first? So why shouldn't the income-generating activity be the peer education, or the paralegal, or the parasocial work, or whatever in your community? Then, and especially bearing in mind that most of the extension workers don't live in their communities, it's a win-win situation. Right? Why can't young people do the birth registration? You would finish birth registration in Tanzania in 3 weeks. In some of the councils we work with, they recognize this. They start giving young people jobs to about collecting refuse or even collecting taxes or so on. They do the work very well. But the whole problem is always again, the elders take over. In Kisarawe, for example, the young people pointed out the buses were going through the village and they weren't paying any tax, any fee. So the young people set up the system. They were collecting the taxes very well. They were taking it to the village government. And when the village government thought this was making a lot of money, they just kicked out the young people and said, we'll do it ourselves. So very often, so we're sort of trying to support the fact that they can do these kind of things. Then at the Buni and startup grind level. This is why, this is how you came to know me, because we sent Neman here to Buni deliberately. And once we build the institute, then we want a strong technology aspect in that, so that people can become innovative using technology in this way. And then thirdly, I think in our training, we teach the principles of entrepreneurship rather than the principles of business. Entrepreneurship is not bookkeeping. So whenever we hear someone on the television saying, oh, you know, we have these wonderful products, but can the government please help us to find a market? We say, well, that's not entrepreneurship, because the entrepreneur knows where their market is, and they may not fulfill it properly to begin with, but they don't ask the government to find a market for them. So, you know, the young people, for example, the girls who are working with the adolescent mothers, we trained them in entrepreneurship, and then they had to do a needs assessment of their communities and what would be a good way of making money. Where were the gaps, so that they could fill those gaps in order to be able to make money for themselves. And some of them have been very successful. At least 2 have built their own houses. And they were very poor to begin with. Yeah. I don't know if that's answered your question. Yeah?
Yes, it has.
Yeah.
So when you have your institute, Brian, Basil, and us will come and help with the technology.
Absolutely. First of all, it will help us set it up. Maybe BBC, born before computers. We need young people to do this, definitely not me.
Okay, so I'm opening it up to the audience. Anyone with a question? I know for sure I haven't asked all questions that can be asked. Yes, Brian.
I have a couple of questions, but I just reserved one. So do you teach entrepreneurship to the youth? And if so, then let's say, why not Tamasha be like an entrepreneurial organization and set it up as a social entrepreneur than an NGO? Is there an advantage of setting it up as an NGO?
Well, as I said, we didn't actually set up an NGO, we set up as a not-for-profit company. Yeah? And I think that, there are layers. I think that the strength of Tamasha and the difficulty of Tamasha is where we work. We would see ourselves as giving training to young people, giving them access, giving them opportunities, which as they grow in these opportunities, they will be able to start accessing opportunities like Buni. A Buni hub, you can't set up a Buni hub in a village in the middle of Newala. Church and I went to one village, they've never been visited by anyone, except CCM at election time. So I don't mean low in terms of weakness, but we're at a lower level in the community where very little is being done. And our aim is to give them opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise have. And then if you take into account the nature of secondary schools in these kind of communities, the secondary schools are hopeless, completely hopeless. One of our peer educators, we were training, and everyone said, well, this guy, he's going to save his secondary school. At last, we're going to have someone who does really well in he's going to show, And he did. He saved his secondary school. The whole school got 0, and he got Division 4. But if he'd been in a different school, he would have got Division 2 or Division 1. He's very intelligent. And there are so many of these intelligent people who have no access to any opportunity at all. So for us, that's where Tamasha wants to work. And then other people, you can pick up these people. And I hope now that we know about Buni Hub, if we get someone, we've found in the villages in Newala, they're making their own movies. But they don't have the finance to cut the DVDs. But they're actually doing it, and they're being very entrepreneurial. We support that. So in the money we have for Newala, we set aside, I think it's 500,000 for each youth center to support entrepreneurial activities that they're doing. But it's up to them what it is they want to do. The second one, which maybe we need to discuss with Buni, that Tamasha would really like to do, is that there are no educational materials in all these schools. So how could we develop an app or a memory card for phones with interactive educational materials, which could be given to the schools? So even if there are no teachers, then at least the pupils can sit around and discuss what's on their phone, on a memory card, which we think is quite entrepreneurial as well, because it's providing there's a huge gap in how we could fill that space. I don't know whether I've answered your question. Yeah. But as we go up, as I say, then you have the Neymans and you have the others who are going to take advantage of Buni and the startup and these other things. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Kamara. I have one question. Like we have heard more politicians, they are just giving the hope to young people. Like if we are going to get seats, if you are going to vote for us, we are going to give you employment. But like 3 years, I was working with young people in different organizations. But I found like there is no way politicians are going to solve this problem because of the situation itself in the country. The economic situation of the country cannot allow more investment on the projects that can make young people to participate in economic development. So my question is, do you see there is any way young people, they can involve in the process of production and they can depend on themselves instead of depending on the government to employ them?
Yes, absolutely. But first of all, I don't think it's true that there are no resources. Nyerere said, kupanga ni kuchagua. Young people are not prioritized. That's the issue. And then when they are, at least officially prioritized, kulikuwa na mabilioni ya mtu fulani. Unakumbuka mabilioni yake? Kumbie. I have never met anyone who has received a single shilling out of those mabilioni. But those were for young people. So the money is there, but it's not reaching the people it should be reaching. So that's the first thing. In the halmashauris, there's a lot of money in the youth, in the community development department for young people. Who does it go to? I don't know. That even when we do we have the youth networks, they still don't access this money. So the money is there, okay? But I don't think it should depend on the government. But secondly, where they see an opportunity, in many different ways they go for it. So for example, in Newala, if you go to Newala between January and about May, half the young people aren't there. They've gone to Lindi because they're farming sesame, ufuta. And they're making a lot of money on it. So it's a big exodus. They all go off on their own and they manage to get land and they come back with money. As I say, they're making their own DVDs. We did a research the other day. In Arusha, what they want are talent competitions because they have all these talents, but no one sees them. If you're not in Dar es Salaam, who sees you? You don't exist. Actually, I'm thinking of write a column that Dar es Salaam is about to declare independence. So those of us who live in Arusha will have to show a passport when we get to Kibaha. Because even I moved to Arusha believing that you could live outside Arusha and still be totally connected with what's going on. You're not. You're forgotten when you're out there. Which is okay, but that's the reality. So there are a lot of things going on which we know very little about. Most of the opportunities are here in Dar es Salaam. But I think with very little support, because even the support we gave to these adolescent mothers, and they started with a few daga, but they have become successful business people. Others set up saloons, they're very entrepreneurial, but they do need some training in entrepreneurship, and then we give them mentorship as well, and then we give them a bit of startup money once they've done the training. And not all of them, but many of them use it very effectively. Yeah, I don't know if that's answered you. But then there's another one which actually also in Anikera-san, the the Constituency Development Fund. Have you ever heard any of that money going to young people? And even the donors. I mean, when I was in UNICEF, we set up this out-of-school program, which was not perfect, and it had a lot of weaknesses, but we reached 21 districts. And then a new person came into UNICEF and said, no, we don't want all this on-the-ground stuff. We want to mobilize young people. So they paid $200,000, I think, for Bongo Star Search, for them to sing a song about gender and another song about HIV. And I was saying, $200,000, if you gave that to the youth centers, they would reach far more people than that song would have reached. So it's a question of priorities all round. But definitely, I think that with very little support, because they are looking for ways of doing it, young people can become very entrepreneurial.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is, do you see Tamasha becoming sustainable, as in not depending on donor money at all? And the second question is, when was your big breakthrough moment? You know, every business or idea has that break where things start working out and they feel like they actually have a business.
I think that Tamasha can become sustainable once we build the institute, because we have 10 acres. So the idea is to have training rooms, playing fields, which will be very good playing fields. One of our facilitators is a national coach. And so people will want to use it. And if you look at participatory training, everyone talks about participatory training, but they're all done in hopeless places. There's always a pillar in the middle of the room, or the flip chart falls down every time, or you're not allowed to stick pieces of paper on the wall, flip charts on the wall. This would be purpose-built for participatory training. And so we believe that it's a marketable idea. And so once that is set up, we may not, and it starts making money for itself, then we would have a foundation that a percentage of the profits from the institute would then go to support the youth programs. So I don't think we'd ever be completely independent of donors, but we wouldn't be dependent on them either. That we'd have our own way, and then the institute would pay for itself. And then, sorry, what do we see our breakthrough moment as? Well, I think it's definitely talking to Startup Grind, and now the world's going to change. I think the breakthrough, we're hoping that, well, building the institute will be a breakthrough moment, because then we have an institutional base and we can really work full-time on what it is we want to do. And I think the second one is, if we could get about 3 or 4 more areas in which, I mean, so far we're working in about 20 districts. If we can start going up to 40 or 50 and have sustainable programs going on there, and so you begin to have youth networks and all these different, then you begin to have a network of the networks, and then you can really get young people organizing for themselves. I fully support the Baraza la Vijana, but I really hope that the Baraza la Vijana inaanza kwenye ngazi ya kijiji. And then it will be a truly representative Baraza la Vijana, and that's what we're pushing for as well. So if these networks are all working like this, then I think that would be a breakthrough moment for us as well.
There was a hand up.
Yeah. There's a place you said there are those old people who you think they might have forgotten what they went through when they were young, and at some point they clog the atmosphere for young people. Now my question is, what's your a strategy to go either through them or go around them in order to access those opportunities from your own side?
Well, I think we have different strategies. The first strategy is to, as I said, that if you train young people, then the perception of the community of those young people changes. So the first place we did this, we trained young people as researchers and as artists. And they did the research into the community, what are the problems of young people. They presented back through drama, through theater and provoked discussions. And so the community perception of them changed. You know, these are now, they're artists and they're researchers, they're not vidues. And so they began to involve the young people more. And secondly, the young people, because they're trained, they know better how to interact with the older people. Then secondly, we try and bring them together. So Churchill did this in Shinyanga. There's a tradition of shikome, which is where you sit around the fire in the evening and the elders basically give directions to the young people. But it's a place of communication, interaction between old and young. So we revived the shikome, and it was quite funny because the young people really prepared themselves. So they came to the shikome with lots of ideas, and the elders weren't prepared at all. So they were blasted by the young people, and they had no answer whatsoever. And because the young people saying, well, why aren't you prepared to work with us? Why don't you talk to us anymore? We want to share ideas with you, but you're never there. You're in the kilabuni or wherever. So at the end of the shikome, the elders saying, my God, those young people, they were too much for us. Can we have another shikome, please? And we'll be better prepared next time as well. But it was in a friendly manner. So informal ways of bringing old and young together, because village meetings now are too politicized. So if a young person speaks in the meeting, kaa chini Chadema wewe, mvuta bangi kwanza, pili Chadema, madhambi yote mawili kwa mpigo. So it's very difficult for them, although we still think you should use these official things, but have less formal ways of getting interaction between old and young. And then, as I say, because elders are concerned about their children, if they see the young people being active and positive, in general, they are very happy about it. Lower officials in government are less happy about it because they see young people as a threat. Because young people tend not to be very diplomatic in the way they talk. They say a spade is a spade. And if someone has taken their money, they say someone has taken our money. And the lower officials don't like that very much. But at the community level, I think it is changing. Even in Ngorongoro, where the Maasai were very negative towards young people. But the peer educators were able to bring the elders and the young people together to start discussing how they change things in their community.
Yes, Basil.
So you earlier on said donors cannot hold the government accountable because donors themselves are corrupt. Was this inclusive or exclusive of your donors? But then my question is, that is a by the way, and probably I'll expect an answer. But do you feel like funding or donor funding is a cause of corruption in Africa? And in any case, if Africa became self-dependent, do you think corruption will go down in Africa? And as an activist and a philanthropist, why am I not hearing as much noise on corruption against the government coming from Tanzanian philanthropists? Like the case in Kenya, for example, where we have Boniface Mwangi, always talking about it loudly. There is always attacking the government if they do something wrong. Why do we have escrow here and probably you hardly hear somebody talking about it, like they easily get away with things like that. Is there something that can be done, and why are people not talking about it from your point of view as an activist?
If I start with the last point first, I don't think it's true that Tanzanians don't talk about it. I think Tanzanians talk about it obsessively. The problem is Tanzanians don't do anything about it. But we talk about it. EPA, Richmond, Meremeta, all the time. The papers are full of corruption. And after that? And to me, one of the problems is the whole system, everyone is involved in it in one way or another. Not everyone, but a very large number of people. So Even I might try to get my child into a different school, whatever. Or you're stopped by the traffic policeman, you don't want to waste your time, so you give him 5,000 shillings. So it's been ingrained. And I think that's one of the problems, and how do you start dealing with it? But the second thing is, I think that under Nyerere, there was actually a lot of freedom of speech. And I know that from personal experience, because with my students, we wrote this book, Summons, Poems from Tanzania, which includes poems about the peasants taking up machine guns to shoot down the corrupt bureaucracy that is destroying us. This is in 1970-something. But Nyerere did not allow independent organization. He allowed freedom of speech, but not freedom of organization. So Tanzanians, we are behind when it comes to how we organize ourselves to bring about change. To me, that is one of the big problems. And when we do organize to bring about change, we are very limited in the methodologies that we use. So it's always a mandamano. Now the government knows what to do with mandamanos these days. So the FFU is there waiting for you along the road, and quack, 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 quack. And then we even tell them, okay guys, now we're going to start in Ubungo and we're going to walk to Manzese. So we even tell them where we're going to be so that they can hit us more effectively. Is that the only way to demonstrate, to do something about corruption? If you read on the website and elsewhere, the people are very creative in the way they take action against these kind of things. And I think we need, as activists, we need to sit down and think about how we can be more creative about it. Thirdly, I think that donor funding, I was thinking about this today. Yes, I think it's very dangerous, and I think it's a drug, and we are drugged. And because it gets the government off the hook. There are two things that worries me about it. First of all, even my house in Arusha, in the 2005 election, I just began to build a house, and because I wanted a round house with lots of rounds, so it was just the rounds on the ground. And so CCM were telling people that this was a village well project. And if we chose CCM, then they would have good wells in the village. So even my house became something. But nearly all the social services are built either by the people themselves, Shuli Zakata, Mabala, etc., or they're built with donor money. But when it comes to the elections, the government says, look, we have built this one, and we built this bridge, and we've done this bridge. They don't say it was donor money, it said, we have done this. Now, it actually legitimizes the government, which is then can use its money for other things, which I hate to think what they're using it for, because the services to the people are largely being paid for by donors. You take HIV and AIDS, for example. How much of the money for HIV and AIDS actually comes from Tanzania in the budget? And many child rights, issues that people feel very strongly about. I'm doing a piece of work at the minute on monitoring and accountability for child rights. There are some very good districts on child rights, but all the districts say if UNICEF were left, or if Save the Children left, it wouldn't continue. So all that great work, and it is great work, but it's not embedded in the people. But the last thing I'd like to say about that is that, first of all, Tanzania is not the only country that is corrupt. If you look at what's happening in the United States at the minute, it is incredibly corrupt. And the whole Republican Party stuff is disgusting. And the elections are corrupt. And the funding of elections is corrupt. And a lot of the senators and the people in the House of Representatives are basically servants of particular big companies. They are corrupt. So we should not just hit ourselves over the head. Corruption is a serious problem everywhere in the world. And to me, what will stop corruption is when people wake up. The problem is not the leaders. I mean, imagine, for example, if George Bush was the president of Tanzania. No, actually, don't imagine it. It's too horrible to think about. He would get away with murder because we wouldn't be taking any action against him. So politicians are politicians all over the world. The issue is, how do we hold our politicians accountable, which is up to us. How do we come together? How do we organize? How do we take action to say, no, that we don't accept this? You know, we are blaming all these politicians, but I'm telling you, 3/4 of them will be elected again. We know they're corrupt. Even the people who vote for them know they're corrupt, but then they vote for them. So, you know, what do we expect? So I think that's where activists and civil action needs to be taken. How do we, and that's why we wrote these 11 booklets, which are about education and water and health, and how people can start taking action against corruption and negligence and all this kind of thing. With regard to Tamasha, I didn't quite hear your question, but I don't think Tamasha has been involved in this corruption, except, of course, that we also are providing services which the government can say they provided. And the last one, just the last one, but donor money goes to the government. Now, in the official democratic triangle, you have executive, legislature, and judiciary. Now, that only works if all three are strong. But because all the money goes to the government, then we have strengthened the government, and Parliament has very little control over money coming from donors. So actually, we've reduced the power of Parliament to hold the government accountable.
I had a question. Basically, there is the donors who are outside, and they always put these commercials that, oh, this is how Tanzania looks like. They show the really poor side, and then you find out that they get a lot of money from that side. Let's say I was in UK, and they would usually get a lot of money there, and then I looked it up more, and I found out that they do get that money, but then it's like sort of like streamed a bit, and then they get their share, and then I just read this up. I did a little research, but they usually take their cut, and then they send some of it here, and then the sum that gets here, it gets cut again because it goes through the government, and that happens, and then by the time it gets to the actual people, it's very, very little. Now, I just read about this. You work with a lot of them, and I just wanted to ask if you've witnessed it firsthand, or what your feelings are about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a very simple example of America and England. So, apart from the money they get back there, but money comes, for example, to DFID, which is the English government aid organization. So there are people here working for DFID who get their salaries. And then they give the money to KPMG, which is a British organization also, who are supposed to oversee the use of this money. So they also pay for their office and their salaries. And then basically, very largely, they distribute their money to British NGOs, VSO, Save the Children, Action Aid, Restless Development, Oxfam. So they also have their offices and their people. And then what rest of it comes to local NGOs like Tamasha, who are supposed to implement it. And then we work with the communities. Of course, we also pay ourselves a facilitation fee, and we have our own office as well, but it doesn't look like their offices. And as far as possible, we make sure that people doing the work also get money at the community level. But what you're saying is absolutely correct. The Americans are even worse. They have massive NGOs, and they tender these big contracts, which are tendered for by the big American NGOs. And even, and this is what really pissed me off, there was money specifically for local NGOs, because at some stage USAID maybe realized that, yeah, maybe this doesn't look so good, so we should support local NGOs. So I know of at least one big American NGO which then set up its own local NGO so they continued to keep the money for themselves. Where it was supposed to support independent Tanzanian NGOs. So yes, that is a big problem, absolutely.
What's the remedy?
What's the remedy? Well, I think on that also we need to speak up. I mean, I wrote a column once where I said that we should have 2 houses of parliament in Tanzania. There should be the HIMS, which is the House of Internal Members, and we could elect them every 5 years because they're not very important to us. So, you know, and then the HERS, which is the House of External Representatives. We should elect our donors. And because they're so important to us, we should elect them every 2 years because we really need to control these guys. But I think it's the same thing as getting up and talking about what's happening in government. We have to talk about because donors can be shamed as well. Eh? When you expose what they're doing, they may not like it very much, but they will have to change what they're doing. And this donor dependence which they create is very dangerous for Tanzania, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay. One last question from me. I read How Are the Bus Driver. I read Mabala the Farmer. How Are the Bus Driver was inspired by a lady from there. You told me that, right?
Yep. She was a bus driver for UDA.
Yeah. So Mabala the Farmer.
I don't think I want to answer that question. Mabala the Farmer, the overall reason why I wrote Mabala the Farmer was it was a time when there were periodic roundups of young people who had no work, and they were all sent back to the village, or not back to the village, they were all sent to the village to farm, without taking into account at all whether they knew anything about farming or not, because many of them were grown up in the town anyway. So I wanted to point out that actually farming is not kimbilio la wakosefu, but farming is actually has its own expertise and it has its own way of working, and we should respect that. So if you look at Mabala fails because he doesn't listen to the expertise of the local people. But the flashpoint was I was teaching Kibosho girls, and we were given land by the headmistress so we could grow our own maize, and I used to go there with my wife, and when it got to about 10 o'clock in the morning, I said, Jamani, sinatosha tu kwa leo? And say, toka hapo na tio vivu. So, yeah, that's where it started, the laziness of Mabala himself. But the other things I didn't do. I did not eat all the makande. And I didn't drink mtama as a way of working.
Anyway, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying this long and talking for so long. And we definitely want you to come back soon. There's so many questions. Like I only asked a quarter of the questions I had for you. So I hope you'll be back, and we'll be glad to have you back.
No, thank you for listening to me and not falling asleep.
And your surprise is still around. We still want to play more songs for you. We actually thought we had like 2 days of brainstorming to try and find the perfect gift for Mabala, and like we came up with the obvious, like carvings. No, he's not a tourist, he's a Tanzanian.
No.
Paintings, he has so many of them. But we decided on something that you've never been given before. That's music from one of the people you're fighting for their rights.
I think it's a perfect present.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he's going to play a few more, and we'll all enjoy listening to them with you.
Brilliant. Yeah. Many thanks.
Please, let's stand up, give a standing ovation.
Oh my God.
Social entrepreneur.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Look into my eyes. Look into my eyes as I look into yours. And baby, take a breath, open your lungs and breathe. Let me feel your heart beating next to mine. Let me hold you closer, girl. And it's okay, you can take my hand. You and I will fly into Wonderland. Living by the sea, chilling in the sand. Married by the beach with no need to plan. And it's alright, I can be your man. Keep you warm at night, be your best friend. Visit mom and dad in the motherland. Hey, back in the motherland. And I know that you know, we both know this is right. Hold me tight, just tonight. So let's live by the coast. Let me boast that you're mine. Tell the world that you're mine. Oh, beyond a fine dime, I will give you my whole heart and soul. Those are yours. I'm yours and you're mine. You're mine, you're mine. Honey, you got the keys, yeah, we can run away. You'll make a home with me, where purple heather sway. And there's no need to be worried, no. Everything will be okay. Girl, I wanna be closer to where you are. You're my guiding star, never lost where you are. Where you are, where you are, where you are. So darling, please never look back. We can keep it real on the right track. Visit mom and dad in the motherland. Hey, back in the motherland. And I know, you know, we both know this is right. Hold me tight, just tonight. So let's live by the coast. Let me boast that you're mine. Tell the world that you're mine. Oh, beyond the fine dime, I will give you my whole heart and soul. Those are yours. I'm yours and you're mine. You're mine, you're mine. Be my light of hope when it goes black. Keep my thought at peace, baby, do that. Be my light of hope when it goes black. Keep my thought at peace, baby, do that. So let's live by the coast. Let me boast that you're mine. Tell the world that you're mine. Oh, beyond the fine dime, I will give you my whole heart and soul. Those are yours. I'm yours and you're mine. I'm yours and you're mine. I'm yours and you're mine. You're mine, you're mine.
Thank you.